Welcome to Sabres Scoop, presented by the Hockey Writers, a once-a-week show covering all things Buffalo Sabres and NHL hockey. We thank you for joining us today, and to make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes, be sure to subscribe to and like the show on YouTube, follow and share us on Facebook, and catch the great hockey content on thehockeywriters.com and on our Twitter feed. You can find us at Sabres Scoop THW and everything else at The Hockey Writer. And make sure to head over to morningskate.io to sign up for our daily morning skate newsletter so you don't miss out on the latest and the weirdest hockey news every day. And our guest for this episode is a familiar face you might notice. You know him, you love him, and he was one of our original co-hosts of Sabres Scoop, Tom Pepper. Tom originally left us to cover the Blues, but is back with THW covering the NHL's newest team, the Seattle Kraken. And we couldn't be happier to have him on tonight to talk some Kraken hockey. Tom, how you doing?
I'm doing great. This is awesome to be back. I missed you guys.
We missed you too, man.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's gonna be fun to talk some Kraken hockey. There's definitely, I think between the two of our teams that we cover, we're at no shortage of things to cover this summer. There's a lot going on, and we'll get to a lot of the Kraken stuff because they're making some moves recently. I mean, just this past week, there's some big news. I know you wrote an article, but we'll start out with some Sabre stuff, and I'm sure you'll be able to chime in pretty well on a lot of it because it has a lot to do with stuff that happened this season. So why don't we just start with this? The biggest piece of Sabres news since we last recorded, which was just last week, and we actually speculated on what could happen, and I think we were pretty right. So it's officially announced that Donny Meatballs Granato has been named the 20th head coach in Buffalo Sabres franchise history. And of course, if you know him, it's because he was named interim head coach after Ralph Kruger's firing in mid-March, and he led the team to a 9-16-3 record through 28 games behind the bench. This is what GM Kevin Adams called an extensive interview process in the search for head coach. And the Sabres are reported to have met with nearly a dozen candidates for head coach by the sounds of it. So I'm just going to ask you guys, we'll go to Jordan first. What do we think of this hiring? Did we see it coming? Is Granato the right man for the job?
I think he very much is the right man for this job. He knows the type of team he has here. With Kruger, they were trying to play too defensive. And with Granato, you notice with a player like Rasmus Dahlin, just a completely different player after the Granato hiring. And I think adding in got more young players to the mix, you're probably going to be seeing a player like Arttu Ruotsalainen play full-time next year, getting some more offensive weapons onto your team. It's going to be a lot better with his system. And ultimately, somebody has to stay in Buffalo eventually, right? Everybody's rumored to be leaving, and having a familiar face next year, and he proved himself honestly quite well towards the end of the year. I think he really can work, and I really think he was the best option out there for this team specifically.
Tom, what about you?
I'm going to agree. I think you saw a major kind of turnaround in how the Sabres were playing after he was named the interim head coach, and a lot of the players got behind him, and they came out and said that they loved playing for him. They loved the style and how he was changing things up, and it worked out, and the team showed a lot of promise afterwards for the rest of the season after that terrible record-tying losing streak there. So I think there's some promise in Buffalo, especially with Don Granato, and he wants to be there, and I think this is a perfect fit, and they got their guy.
Yeah, like both of you said, Granato said in a press conference today that he never even considered pursuing another coaching vacancy. I'm sure if he wanted to, he probably could have, but he said the demand of Sabres fans, the demand of our hockey community is where I want to be. And that's just awesome to hear as a Sabres fan and somebody who covers the Sabres, somebody who's passionate about the fan base. And I think both he and Adams are. And, today's press conference proved it. Jordan, I think you got more to say about that.
I definitely do. And I mean, the fact that somebody actually wants to stay in Buffalo is quite surprising. So hopefully we start to see a little bit more of that in future years. But in the press conference to officially introduce him as the team's head coach, Kevin Adams was also asked about the Jack Eichel situation and said that he spoke with his agent on the phone this week and that the two parties are apparently close to reaching a resolution. Let's start with you, Brandon. What do we think the resolution is? Is it a trade? Have they made up? Or is he staying? What is he getting moved, or is he staying in Buffalo, in your opinion?
Yeah, honestly, I don't think the Granato hiring, even though, him and Eichel go way back to the U.S. development team. When Jack was just 18 years old. That's Don Granato was the head coach there, and they obviously go way back and have a good relationship, but we didn't get to see Jack play under him, unfortunately, in the second half of the season. I don't think this changes anything, to be honest with you. I think because in the same breath, Kevin Adams also said after that statement that he hasn't changed his mind about the surgery, letting Jack do the surgery that he wants. So I don't think it changes anything. I think he's still headed out the door. It's unfortunate, but I think that's where we're headed.
What do you have to say on the matter, Tom? I know some people think Eichel could be going to the Seattle Kraken in somehow crazy speculative trades, but what do you make of that situation?
I don't know if they'll be able to gather the assets to have a good enough return for Eichel. I still think it's just crazy to think Eichel's probably on his way out of Buffalo from the sounds of it, and especially with how it's happening. This is, how it's kind of turned into this surgery issue and not so much as the on the ice stuff. And it's unfortunate for Sabres fans to think that they're losing someone who, just a few years back, they got this guy who was going to come and be the superstar of the franchise, the future of the franchise, and just a few years later, and it looks like he's gone because of this argument here, and he's fed up with losing. So I think the era is over. I think after all the stuff that's come out over the last few months about this, it's just totally blown public, and I think he's done. I think he's going to be on the move in the next few weeks.
Honestly, guys, the comments made by the agent today did I don't know, it's starting to shift my perspective a bit. I think at least if a trade is going to happen, I think we're going to start to see it maybe after the NHL draft as maybe before, which kind of a lot of rumors were suggesting. I think there is a chance Eichel starts the season with the Buffalo Sabres next year, and hopefully so, because that would be obviously a nice resolution if all of this can work. But I mean, if they're not budging on the surgery, it's hard to imagine he's going to want to stay. So a lot of factors in this situation.
Yeah, it's a lot. And, hopefully it remains in the hypothetical for the time being, like you implied. And here's something hypothetical too. I saw on Twitter, Jordan, you put this in here though. Good on you. So Joe Marino of the Charging Buffalo pointed out that a hypothetical situation, for Rasmus Dahlin could be in play. So this had to do all with offer sheets, and it just screamed reminders of the Sebastian Aho offer sheet. Was it right? For that Montreal did on Carolina.
Oh yeah.
Was it Aho?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was Aho. Yeah, it reminded me of that. So let's hope it doesn't happen. But this is what he said. He said for Rasmus Dahlin, in an offer sheet situation, he'd be in the tier where the Sabres would receive a 2022 first, a 2023 first, a 2022 second, and a 2022 third. And to do that, a contract like $7 million over 7 years would have to be offered on the offer sheet. So this was all hypothetical, of course, but it really got Sabres Twitter talking. And the main question was, if you're the Sabres, do you match it or do you take the picks? And there were over 2,300 votes on this, and 71% of Sabres fans did what I would do and match it, and 29%, surprisingly, that's a big number. Almost 30% of Sabres fans would want the team to take the picks and let Dahlin go. Jordan, you can harp on the analytics and statistics here if you want, about Dahlin in particular, but I just want to know, what would you do in this situation?
Well, honestly, I saw a surprising amount of people, even on Sabres Twitter, saying that they would receive the compensation. And honestly, I know 2 first-round picks, especially in these next 2 drafts, would be very nice. But I think you're really going to start to see Rasmus Dahlin enter his prime years over these next 2 to 3 years, and you're going to see him at his peak. Some specific statistics, like you said, that we can bring up. His 5v5 goals for percentage from April 1st on to the end of the regular season. This was under Don Granato. 53.1%, sorry. And this was facing top line top line matchups of the opposing teams. He really was a dominant player under Don Granato. And I think if you can see that more over a consistent long term, which he kind of showed he could, I mean, you got a 20+ game sample size there. I think this is a number 1 defenseman in the making, and you don't just give that up, especially if it's going to be at $7 million. I don't know necessarily if that's going to be the exact contract, but if it's anything like that, I say you take it and you keep Dahlin in Buffalo.
Yeah, if it's $7 million for somebody like Dahlin, I'm jumping on that. That's no question for me. I mean, if because he's going to be due for a new contract sooner than later, and that would be a steal in my book. Tom, let's hear it. Would you let him go for the compensation, or would you match and keep him around?
I would keep him around. You gotta keep. I mean, especially if Eichel's gone too, you gotta keep one of those guys around. And Dahlin, I mean, he was a bit off this year, but he's still showing a lot of promise. He's still a very young guy, and he's got a lot of potential. And again, like Jordan mentioned, under Don Granato, you saw that improvement in his game, and I think it's just going to keep going up from here. And I think he will be able to prove himself.
Yeah, totally. I mean, with a player like that, when you actually let him play his game, and he even pointed that out after Don Granato got hired, like his play style is the way he learned to play hockey, Dahlin. And you saw it in the Swedish Hockey League when he dominated there. You've seen it in bits and pieces in the NHL. I think you're finally going to get to see that over the consistent period soon, and you're going to see him compared to the likes of a Cale Makar soon, hopefully, or maybe even an Adam Fox, because he does have that potential to be a game-breaking defender in this league. And who knows, maybe the next one, an Owen Power, who could potentially be selected by the Sabres this coming month. He has yet to meet with the Buffalo Sabres for a draft interview. It's also come out that Matthew Beniers also having yet to have their draft interview with the Sabres. They both stated how they are unsure when it's going to happen. These are the challenges with the Zoom meetings, of course. And although it should happen eventually, you got to hope, it poses some interesting scenarios. So Lance Lukowski reported yesterday on the fact that the Sabres are higher on forward William Eklund than any other forward in this draft class. He is a name to watch if the Sabres do decide to acquire another top 10 pick. And I want to know, guys, what is more likely? The Sabres trading a player like Eichel or Reinhardt for a top 10 pick and using their first to select either Power or Beniers, or do they swing for the fences and select William Eklund with the first overall pick? Let's start with you, Tom. Do you think the Sabres go bold here, or do you say they maybe try to acquire another top 10 pick?
It wouldn't surprise me if they go bold and they go forward number one. I mean, we saw last year Jack Quinn, which a lot of people were upset about taking Jack Quinn 8th overall when you had guys like Anton Lundell available there and Marco Rossi. I think the way Kevin Adams' mindset is, and the way that I got the impression from how he was speaking last year at the draft, is they're going to take who they believe is going to be a long-term Buffalo Sabre who belongs. I don't think they're as concerned about, are we going to miss out on a player? Are we going to miss out on potential? Kevin Adams is going to take the guy that he thinks is going to make the Buffalo Sabres the best it can be. So if that means missing out on Owen Power when he's most people have him at number one, I think he's going to do it. I think if there's any team that's going to do it, it's the Sabres.
What do you have to say, Brandon?
Yeah, if I were Kevin Adams, I'm taking Matt Beniers at number one, and I'm trying to acquire a second top 10 pick to hope that Eklund falls to me. In a perfect world, they get Beniers and Eklund. Not to take anything away from Owen Power, but we saw this in, I think it was 2013, when Seth Jones was projected first overall, and he fell to fourth to Nashville and ended up getting traded for a forward. I mean, like, he was projected first, and then the Avalanche were so keen on taking McKinnon, and look at that, how that turned out. When you trust your gut and you think a player is going to do something for your franchise, he can turn into Nate McKinnon. And, if Adams thinks that a forward's going to be able to do that from this draft class, then all the more power to him, not Owen Power, but all the more metaphorical power to him. Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Jordan? What would you do?
What would I do? Well, that's a good question. I think what I would do and the Sabres would do, honestly, are different. I don't know. We know with this scouting department, even though they've added a few pieces, they even have a head of scouting, which is kind of surprising. They have 7 personnel working under the team. I think they're still going to go bold here, man. Like, by all accounts, they all are very supportive of the Jack Quinn pick that they made last year. And I know it'd be really heavily scrutinized that they did this, even though a lot of people are high on this player in that Quinn. Like, they think he should be a top 5 pick. I just don't know if you pick him over a guy like Beniers. I think we're going to see William Eklund end up as a Buffalo Sabre with that first overall pick. If not, then Jack Eichel's getting traded, and you're likely seeing him being traded to a team like the Anaheim Ducks, and that's who they're selecting with the other pick. So it's going to be one of those two scenarios. if they can't make an Eichel deal happen, don't be surprised if Eklund ends up as a Sabre with the first overall pick.
Yeah, hey, if they can get all those guys and see Jack Quinn crack the roster next season, maybe we're wrong about him, but who knows? We'll see what happens. And we're gonna hop into some Kraken stuff, but let's reset the show here. You're watching Sabres Scoop presented by the Hockey Writers. Make sure to subscribe to and like the show on YouTube, follow and share us on Facebook, and catch all the great hockey content on thehockeywriters.com and on our Twitter feed, which is at Sabres Scoop THW. So we're going to wrap up the Sabres stuff and move into some Seattle Kraken, which is why our familiar face but new writer for the Kraken is here. So we got some questions, and the big news that I had previewed a little bit earlier in the show was the head coaching hire. So both of our teams recently hired new head coaches. What are your thoughts on what was kind of an out of left field hire to most people in the hockey world, I would say, except those really close to the Kraken? They kept this hush hush. Honestly, they really did. Dave Hakstol, the first head coach in franchise history. What are your initial thoughts? I know you wrote something about this.
Yeah, it was definitely a secret. This was not what vast majority of people were expecting. I mean, his name wasn't even in most of the like candidates lists that people were putting out. You had Rick Tocchet was in Seattle for 3 different interviews, and obviously that fell through. You had guys like Gerard Gallant, and you had Bruce Boudreau on the market, and it kind of came out of nowhere. Dave Hakstol is a guy who kind of, he spent most of his coaching career in the NCAA, where he's had some great success with North Dakota, and that kind of proved him worthy of an NHL head coaching job, where he went to Philadelphia and he played he coached 3 full seasons behind the bench there, and they made the playoffs twice before he was fired in his 4th season. And he hasn't really had an opportunity since then. He's been the assistant coach in Toronto, and he's been focusing on defense there. But this selection kind of took me a little bit to research and kind of get my thoughts together on it, because this is not who I was expecting. And I like it. I think this is a cool scenario. I think it would have been kind of boring to go with Gerard Gallant after, you're just taking him because what he did with Vegas a few years ago, do something different. And Dave Hakstol is a guy who's coming in for a second chance behind an NHL bench, and he has potential. And that's going to be the same scenario with every single player on this roster. They're all misfits that are going to be left exposed by their NHL teams, and they're coming here for a second chance. And we saw Vegas have that incredible success in their first year, and a lot of that was because of how the team bonded together and how they all were working together to prove people wrong. And I think the Kraken have set up a perfect scenario for this to happen again here, with a coach that's very well known for creating like strong bonds with his players, and he's a great communicator. I really like this selection. Definitely not what I was expecting, but there's also no pressure here. Like, this is an expansion team. Like, I don't think we should be comparing them to Vegas. Totally different. They're a totally different franchise. I think you treat this process very carefully, and you don't rush it. You're building up a franchise here, and I think this is a perfect guy to bring in behind the bench to start.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like Seattle's moves, honestly, from the personnel decisions to everybody they've hired in terms of their community work already. I really like what they're doing there. And in terms of Dave Hakstol, as a Leafs fan, I've really paid attention to his key work on the defensive pairings. I know the Leafs made a lot of changes 2 off seasons ago. I mean, acquiring TJ Brody changed a lot, but that defense really improved, and more specifically, the penalty killing, really aggressive. I really liked how the Leafs penalty kill looked, and that wasn't the problem for them in the playoffs. It was other issues. Their defensive goaltending was completely fine in the playoffs, and that was because of the work that Dave Hakstol put in. And I know if you talk to Philadelphia fans, they hate him, but I've even seen him be compared to Craig Berube, who I'm sure you've seen those comparisons as well, who, I mean, as an assistant coach, a lot of people thought he maybe wasn't the greatest, but sometimes you can just thrive when you're in another position to be a head coach. And I think with Hakstol, you're probably going to see him work a little bit better in Seattle, in my opinion. And with that, guys, what kind of pieces are you looking for in the expansion draft if you're Ron Francis or Dave Hakstol, we're going to go with you here, Tom, because you are the expert. Are there any players that look like they're destined to be Krakens next season? Now, I'm sure, obviously, a lot of players. You could probably name at least 50 out of the 30 other 30 teams, sorry, that we'll be selecting. But let's get into it here. From a Sabres perspective, who would you think would be available in expansion, and who would you like them to take from that team's first?
From the Sabres, there's not going to be a ton of options really for the Seattle Kraken to pick a game changer from Buffalo. But the name that I think is most likely is Rasmus Asplund. He came in, he played 28 games this season, 11 points, and he's not an NHL player really. That was kind of his break into the NHL, and he did show a lot of promise there. He was second round pick in 2016. And with a team like the Kraken, you're gonna want to get a lot of those young guys who have potential to get better. You're not gonna want to stack up on all the old guys. Like, I know Mark Giordano is a name that's out there a lot. He's 37 years old. Like, you don't want to fill your roster with that as a new franchise. And I think if you're going young, Rasmus Asplund's a name that I'd go with. I mean, another one. There's potential Ristolainen or William Borgen could be a potential, could potentially be exposed to the Kraken. And I really like really like about Ristolainen is how much of a heavy hitter he is. I mean, when I was covering the Sabres last season, I don't remember the exact number, but he was miles ahead of any other Sabre in hits. And I think that you got to have someone like that on your team. You got to have someone who's going to go out there and answer the bell and kind of, show that he was frustrated, which was another thing with the Sabres last year. I didn't see anyone really getting frustrated that much when they were on these streaks. And it was Ristolainen, it seemed every time, was the one that was stepping up, roughing up the other team. And I think that's a great quality player to have on your team. So if he is left exposed, I don't know if he'll be a Buffalo Sabre next year. Even if he's not exposed, I see him getting traded. I think that's long overdue. I think that relationship's broken there. But yeah, if I had to guess, it's going to be one of the Rasmuses.
You really think the Sabres would leave Rasmus Ristolainen exposed, eh? And I think that makes sense for Seattle to take him. I know his contract maybe would make it a possibility, but you really think there's a chance there that Ristolainen could actually be exposed to Seattle?
If he's not traded, I do think there is a potential for him to be exposed. They're obviously going to protect Dahlin and Yoki Haru, and then potentially Will Borgen. He did show a lot of promise. He only played 10 games this season. He didn't have any points, but he showed that he's potentially a good player to have on your defense at the NHL level. So I think it's probably unlikely. I agree with you. I think it's probably unlikely it is Ristolainen out of those two. But if he is there, I think that would be a great selection for the Kraken. But most likely, I'm going to say it's Rasmus Asplund.
Yeah, totally. I've seen Asplund's name a lot in that conversation. And now I kind of want to shift into the other NHL teams that Seattle will just get the pick from instead of Vegas because they are, of course, exempt. Had to pay that ownership fee, though, but of course. So let's get into this. Who are some of the cornerstone players that you think Seattle's going to be getting? Because the name I keep seeing is TJ Oshie of the Washington Capitals, and people really think he's going to be the first captain in their history. You can add on to that list, but do you think a player like Oshie is going to be a Seattle Kraken come next season?
I think it would be incredible, but I also think it's unlikely. TJ Oshie has said multiple times in public he wants to be a Washington Capital. The Washington Capitals have said they really want Oshie there. And I think if he had a choice, he would stay. Well, if he did have a choice, I'm almost 100% confident he would say he would want to stay with the Washington Capitals. But that's not exactly how it works. If Washington needs to protect other players and Oshie's exposed, I think it's a lock that the Seattle Kraken will take Oshie. Oshie's a Washington state native. He's from around there. He's great captain material. I think he'd be he'd sell jerseys like crazy. That guy's, I don't see it happening, to be honest. I really hope it does. Oshie's one of my favorite players. And it would be awesome to see him in a Kraken uniform, but just the way how badly the Capitals want him and how badly he wants to stay a Capital, I think they're going to sort something out and get him protected. But we'll see. We'll see. He is getting older, so there is a chance.
That's right. You mentioned Mark Giordano earlier as an example of like you don't want them to take older players, and so you really got to decide like what direction are you taking as a franchise. So just to cap off this one like little segment here, what kind of players exactly are you looking for in the expansion draft? I know it's a pretty broad question, but like what's like the cookie cutter type piece that you're looking to like build around? I would say.
I'm sticking with, I think you want to mainly focus on getting younger guys. If you're getting older guys, you want them to be leaders like Mark Giordano. If you're bringing in Mark Giordano, I'd be very much in favor of bringing in Mark Giordano. I mean, he won the Norris Trophy, 2 seasons ago? He's still a very good defenseman, but he's not going to be around much longer. He's not going to keep up the same production as he is now. He's 37, 38. I think the Kraken are going to have to target younger players. And another name, if we're talking defense here, is Matt Dumba. Could potentially be exposed by the Minnesota Wild, and he's 27 years old. Like you're going to want guys in their 20s, whoever you can take. And if they're not established guys like Matt Dumba, you want to get guys with potential. You got another guy in terms of goalies. The goalie market's going to be very scarce for the Kraken. There's not a lot of good candidates they're going to be able to pick from. But one of the names that a lot of people have been talking about is Adin Hill on the Arizona Coyotes, who played quite a few games this season for the Arizona Coyotes with Kemper and Ronta. Just seems like taking turns getting injured. They just kept going down, and Adin Hill came in there and he was great. Actually, he really showed that he was a capable NHL goaltender, and he's only 25 years old, which is for a goalie very young. He's breaking into the league, and I think this is a guy who, if he wouldn't establish himself as a starter in Seattle, he definitely has backup potential. And I think that's what they're going to have to do. They're going to have to just build around younger players who have the potential to get better and just hope things work out here. I mean, you also know they obviously have a powerhouse analytics department, so I'm sure they're going to be looking at a lot of this and the projections and kind of nitpicking through the stats at who they're going to get. But I think that's how they got to build this roster.
Yeah, totally. Speaking of cornerstone pieces to build around, let's talk the entry draft. This is a simple question. Who should the Kraken take at second overall, their first ever selection in an entry draft?
It's really going to come down to who the Sabres select. If Owen Power isn't taken by Buffalo, like you guys are suggesting, it could be William Eklund. I think Seattle has to jump on Owen Power, and I know Ron Francis is really big on building strong defense, and I think that's also how the Kraken are likely going to be built, is going to be from the goaltending and defense up. I think that's going to be the priority for him. And I think if Owen Power can slide to second and the Sabres pass up on him, I think that's a great pickup for the Seattle Kraken. He's expected to go back and play another year of college hockey, and there's really that really doesn't matter. I actually think that's a more beneficial thing. I don't think he's ready for the NHL yet, and I think another year of college could do him wonders. I mean, you saw Cale Makar and Quinn Hughes went back for another year of college after they were drafted. Look at them now. There's no rush, and if Owen Power slides, I think the Kraken have to take them. But if Owen Power does go first roll to the Sabres, it's got to be, in my eyes, Beniers or Eklund. You got to go forward. The only defense that I'd be going for as the Kraken is Owen Power.
Yeah, I definitely see that there. It's going to definitely be one of Eklund, Beniers, or Power. And I mean, it does seem like Powers will probably be the guy the Sabres do select. I'll be kind of shocked if it's not him. I know we just said it could be Eklund, but I kind of get the sense Seattle probably isn't selecting William Eklund unless I don't know, unless they would somehow acquire another pick. But Tom, we got to ask you this. What are the biggest storylines surrounding this team heading into their inaugural season? In Vegas in their inaugural year, we got to see a player like William Karlsson come out of nowhere and score 42 goals. It's uncertain whether a player like that could potentially do it for Seattle. I'm sure we're going to see some surprises like that. Obviously, the biggest storyline of their season for Vegas back in 2017-18 was they made the Stanley Cup final in their first year. There's so many options to choose from here, but what do you think will be ultimately that huge storyline, or maybe multiple storylines that this team will kind of garner throughout the year?
I think it's going to be similar to Vegas, how it was kind of a story of misfits coming together. I think that's what we're going to see again here, but this time we've also got the coach tied in. I think the fact that Dave Hakstol was such a surprise signing, there's going to be a lot more pressure and a lot more eyes on him than if it had been someone like Bruce Boudreau or Gerard Gallant. People want to see why this hiring was made and if this was the right call by Ron Francis, because this was a certainly not one of the front runners for the job in terms of the public eye. And I think it's just going to be really exciting these next few months. I mean, these guys, they have one player signed to their roster right now. In a few weeks from now, they're going to have an entire roster. This is really exciting stuff. And you think about it, when is the next time you're ever going to get to witness something like this again? The team's at 32 teams. The league's at 32 teams now. I mean, if you're going to go above that, you got to add like 4 to even it out. You wouldn't just add 1 to one division and leave it unbalanced. I think if any city's getting a new team now, it's a relocation. So this could really be a once in a lifetime final thing that we get to see here is an NHL franchise starting from scratch, picking a player from each NHL team. And there's just so much to look forward to and so many unknowns and the pressure that's going to be on them. You mentioned Vegas's success. I think that's going to turn into a rivalry, honestly. The two modern day expansion franchises, Vegas and Seattle, both play in the same division. And I don't think it's possible to replicate that success. I don't think you can expect an expansion franchise to go to the Stanley Cup final in their first season. I mean, it was also surprising. I mean, when Vegas first picked their roster, I think a lot of us were kind of like looking at it and like, oh, it's average.
I thought they would be awful. Everybody was saying they were going to be the worst team.
Yeah.
Of course, revisionist history, everybody is now saying, oh, they were stacked, oh, everything. But yes. I mean, that wasn't the case.
Everyone does complain about that and say that the expansion draft is rigged and stuff, or it was set up too easy for Vegas. And Seattle has the exact same rules as the Vegas Golden Knights do. So there's going to be pressure. There is going to be pressure to replicate Vegas' success, but I don't think that should be the main storyline. I think it's just going to be about this community. I mean, hockey's back in Seattle. This is the first American city to win a Stanley Cup. This is big. There's so many things to look forward to. It's just going to be cool to see this whole roster get built and how this city ends up rallying around this team.
Totally. Yeah. The month of July, that's got a lot in store, but definitely what I'm most excited for is the expansion draft and just picking apart, every pick and just like, making my predictions and whatnot. Totally. It's going to be super fun team to cover. So to put a bow on this, how would you grade how the team has handled things today? This could be from way back when to when they picked, a name, a logo, a color scheme, jerseys, Ron Francis, Dave Hakstol, how they're approaching the expansion draft and how they're keeping things close to home as far as how they're operating and making their picks. How would you grade overall how they've handled themselves as a young franchise?
Oof, I'm gonna give. Let's see. I'll go B plus. I'll go B plus. I love A plus on the uniforms. I absolutely love the uniforms. Beautiful uniforms. Beautiful color scheme. The arena, unreal. Looks beautiful. It's incredible. And also first net zero carbon arena in the entire world. There's some pretty cool things about that arena to nitpick. And I really like what they've done. So I love Ron Francis as a general manager. I feel very confident in him. I'm confident in the Hakstol signing. The only things that I would say lower it to a B plus for me are, I feel like the Kraken should have been promoting this playoffs more. I feel like there's a bit of a lack of, wouldn't you be wanting to rally the Seattle community up, like just as the playoffs are going on and, the expansion draft is next month? I think they should have had a lot of stuff going on. I know they had a post-game show for game 2 the other day, but they should have been doing this stuff the whole way around and tweeting and sharing social media of the playoffs, because this is a very exciting NHL playoffs this year. It is most years, but this year has just been awesome. We've seen so many different storylines in this year. Now you got the Montreal Canadiens have made it all the way to the Stanley Cup. Like there's a lot of exciting things going on that especially for a team like the Kraken coming in new, you can give them hope, lowest seed in this year's NHL playoff in the Stanley Cup final. Maybe there's some hope for the Kraken. And I think that's the only thing that they've really missed out on is they should be, marketing this more. But I mean, it's kind of late now. We're in the final. I'm sure everything's going to be fine. Once they get this roster going, I'm sure they're going to get the whole city to rally around this team. But overall, I'd say B+. I love everything they're doing. I just wish they were, kind of marketing the sport a bit more.
Well, I'm sure you're going to see the marketing ramp up over the course of July because we got an expansion draft coming up. And like you said, we got some Stanley Cup finals going on at this moment. So we got to head into our general NHL news. The Cup finals here. And we're talking about, we're 2 games into this now. And the Canadiens find themselves down to the Tampa Bay Lightning by 2-0. And then are heading to Montreal for Game 3. What are our thoughts on this series so far? I mean, Montreal is quite clearly the more dominant team in Game 2 by every metric you look at, even just looking at the shots on goal. What do we think? What do we just think of the play that's gone on here that's led to Tampa winning these first 2 games? Let's go to you, Brandon.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you watched all of Game 1 like I did, but Tampa looked far and away like the much better team. I mean, the Canadiens, like I've said this, like against the Vegas Golden Knights in the last series, they came storming out of the gates every single game in the first period, and they just got the jump on them. And that's, I think, why they won. They came out and they really put the pressure on. Did not happen in Game 1, and that's why they got almost steamrolled 5-1. Game 2, they played way, way, way better. I mean, they got 40+ shots off on Vasilevsky, and he only let in 1. I mean, that's who should have been your Vezina winner right there. But I mean, yeah, I don't know. Down 2-0 to the defending Cup champions. This has Tampa repeating written all over it. Unfortunately, that's what my prediction would be. Is I think Montreal might win Game 3, and if they win Game 3, they might have a good chance to win Game 4. But I think if this thing, even if it goes to 7 games, I think Tampa would just take it based on skill level, pedigree, the way the team's built, the way they're coached, the way they play. They have the experience, just so many factors. But I think it's been a good series nonetheless, contrary to what a lot of people thought. I don't think it's going to be a sweep. I can make that prediction. So that's all I got.
What do you think, Tom? Do you mainly agree with Brandon there, or do you think the Habs will put up a little bit more of a fight?
I mean, they put up quite a fight in Game 2. This is something interesting, is just how Tampa Bay kind of, like you mentioned, Brandon, like they dominated Game 1, and then Montreal came out in Game 2 and they dominated, and unfortunately they lost after all that effort that was put in at the hands of Andrei Vasilevsky. But I mean, we also, I think back to an example of this is the Colorado versus Vegas series. Colorado came out and absolutely whooped Vegas in that Game 1, but they lost the series in the end. And everyone was calling Vegas a done deal once that they were going to be out after that Game 1 against Colorado because of that absolute beating that they laid down on Vegas. Vegas won the series. This is hockey. Anything can happen. It just takes one weird bounce and the score can change. I mean, Montreal technically should have, if you go by the stats, they should have won last night, but that's just not the way the puck bounce. I do think it's very unlikely that they're going to beat Tampa, as much as I hope they do. I think it's less exciting when you have a repeating champion. I always love seeing teams, especially that haven't won a cup in a long time, go on and win. But I do think there's hope. If they win this next game, it really could be a changing point in this series. I mean, we've seen it before in the playoffs. I was just saying they denied the request for more fans at Bell Center, if I'm correct.
The Quebec denied them, actually, I believe.
The
Quebec
also,
health officials.
That also sucks. I think if you had more fans in that building and got it more electric in there, I think that could also play a huge role. I think it's going to be Tampa, but hopefully I'm wrong and Montreal does turn this around and win Game 3 and get themselves on a hot streak.
Yeah, there's definitely a few factors here. Alex Killorn traveling to Montreal. He missed the last game. I think you definitely saw his absence was very noted in game 2, even though the Lightning were able to win it off that sweet Blake Coleman one-handed goal. The fact that that guy's done that 3 times is just unbelievable. You could cut off his one arm and he would be just fine. But yeah, I think in my opinion, if I have to give my series prediction, I say Tampa is winning this in game 6. I think the series does go to 6 games. I think these next 4 are going to be just utterly crazy if it gets to that, of course. And I think Tampa's repeating it here. They're going to be the first team to do that since Pittsburgh, and it's going to be more impressive because they're $18 million, I believe, over the salary cap. So I can't believe Julian Breezeball didn't win GM of the year because this team is just way too dominant, in my opinion.
Yeah, totally. Speaking of GMs who are making good moves, there was a trade made today, and it wasn't a small one. I think it was actually quite a big one. It involved a pretty good player. Victor Arvidsson traded from the Nashville Predators to the Los Angeles Kings for a 2021 second and a 2022 third. General thoughts. What do we think of this move for Nashville, for LA? Does this set the market for similar players such as Connor Garland, somebody else we've seen in the trade rumors? Let's go to Tom.
I think it's weird. It's questionable. I don't know if this might be an expansion draft move. I don't know if this is a sign that Nashville is going to start rebuilding. I feel like, me personally, I feel like they missed their window, like probably a couple of years ago. I mean, after they made it to that final, they've never been able to replicate that kind of play and success again. But it is interesting they would send out one of their strong forwards like that just for picks. And I if I had to guess, it's an expansion draft move, and they're trying to protect more players and get at least something back for losing one of their forwards. But for me, it was questionable. This could be marking a rebuild.
Yeah, it definitely seemed like an expansion draft move, but another factor into it is what he kind of had like a Taylor Hall like season where his shooting percentage was just so low because this is a player that scored 34 goals back in 2018-19. Like this guy's a dominant player when he needs to be. And Nashville clearly believed in that quite a while ago because they signed him to that 7-year contract, and now that's finally getting set to expire in the coming years. But put him in. If you get this player and put him on the line with Andrei Kopitar and he just regresses back to the mean, you could potentially have a 25 goal scorer there playing on that first line. LA is starting to kind of look like a playoff sleeper here heading into next season because I really like the way they're building that team. They just have a plethora of prospects. They're going to be adding another one in this draft. I don't know what Nashville's doing here. And clearly Philip Forsberg doesn't either, because I don't know if you saw this, but on his Instagram story, literally posted an emoji of a downward thumb. And, those 2 Swedish players probably had such a strong bond. He doesn't even know what his team's doing. I don't know what Nashville's doing. That's not a good trade for them at all. Definitely. Yeah. And we do have one last little trade rumor just to touch upon here, because Duncan Keith, this is coming from Elliot Friedman, is likely leaving the Chicago Blackhawks and looks poised to head to a Western Conference team, or more specifically a Western Canadian team. And there's been some rumors today that kind of make it sound like he could be ending up with the Edmonton Oilers. And I just want to know, guys, let's start with you, Tom. What do we think of that fit? Duncan Keith, obviously way past his prime, not necessarily the player he used to be, but does bring in that experience.
Yeah, he definitely isn't the same player he used to be. And I know the Kraken were also, there's potentially that he was going to end up in the Pacific Northwest. So he's kind of just looking in that general region there, where his family's from, I believe. I think this is, if anyone's going to trade for him, you got to be very careful you don't overpay. You're not, the most you're getting out of this trade is really leadership qualities and a locker room guy. This is not a guy I'd be trusting to start building my defense around. He's way past his prime, but I mean, if you can bring him in for an affordable price, you're not giving up too much. I think it would be a solid trade to have a guy like that in the locker room. He's won 3 Stanley Cups, He's a leader. He's been a leader in Chicago for a long time, and he'd be a great ad. But I think of this and I feel like just the name, I feel like someone might overpay in this trade. But we'll see what happens. I think you get this guy for leadership, not for playmaking.
Do you agree with that statement, Brandon?
I do, and I'll just say this. If you're the Edmonton Oilers, there's no reason you should be going after Duncan Keith. Like, I know you've had problems on the blue line for God knows how long, but look at Darnell Nurse, who just broke out. Like, this guy just became what you wanted him to become, and he had a great season. Darnell Nurse did. I mean, Clefbaum wasn't even around all season. I mean, you're gonna have left shooting defensemen. It doesn't need to be Duncan Keith. If you're the Oilers, don't do this. Peter Chiarelli's not there anymore, so there's nobody who should want this guy. Quite honestly speaking. But yeah, I think Duncan Keith is headed the way of Brent Seabrook, and that's going to be not playing. So I really don't know a team in the West that needs him. So in my mind, yeah, there's a team that's going to get him, but I think it's going to be a bad move in the end.
Yeah, this definitely seems like a Ron Hainsey situation when he was with the Toronto Maple Leafs, because he was playing first pairing minutes with the Chicago Blackhawks this past season. And I mean, if you put him on the third pair role, I imagine you might start to see some more success from him, because I believe at this moment he's currently in the first percentile and wins above replacement of Jay Fresh Hockey's model. And basically what that means is he was literally out of basically every player in the league, he was basically among the worst of any player. He was below replacement level. He shouldn't have been on an NHL roster, but that's kind of due to the position that he was in. I think if you could put him on the third pair, you're likely at least see him be serviceable. And maybe if it's just for, I don't know, a third round pick, you could do it. But even for a team like the Edmonton Oilers, they don't need a defenseman. They need some scorers. They need to surround McDavid, Draisaitl with some actual scoring talent. And I don't know, they need to get more creative, man, that team. And I know Ken Holland doesn't seem to be able to do that, and he's made comments kind of suggesting that he won't, but I don't think Duncan Keith is the answer. And I think I'll be honest, I see him ending up with the Vancouver Canucks as well. I think that's also going to be the other team he's likely ending up with. But even Winnipeg, Winnipeg needs defenders, so I don't know. It seems he looks poised to head to Western Canada.
Yeah, no, we'll see. Well, hey, there's a lot to be excited about, a lot coming up. I'm sure all three of us are going to have no shortage of things to write about. So we'll all be very busy in the coming weeks, but super excited for everything, and cool to talk some Kraken tonight. So with that being said, let's wind down here. We thank you for joining us. This has been Sabres Scoop presented by the Hockey Writers. Make sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube, follow and share us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter at Sabres Scoop THW. And once again, make sure you head over to morningskate.io to sign up for our daily Morning Skate newsletter. You can also just find that on the Hockey Writers homepage. Don't miss the latest and weirdest hockey news every day with that newsletter. And thank you again to Tom for coming on tonight to talk some Kraken. It felt like the good old days again, like you said. And go make sure you follow him on his new Twitter account at Tom Pepper. That's all Kraken all day. And don't miss out on all the great hockey content on thehockeywriters.com. For Jordan and Tom, this is Brandon, and this has been Sabres Scoop. Until next time.